Seahawks fans, wherever you may be, thanks for listening to the show. Join your hosts, Bill Alvstad and Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, Seahawks fans. Welcome back to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with co-host Keith Myers here to talk Seahawks football. This week, in our midweek show, we have got some updates for you on roster news, some little tidbits of injury updates from Pete Carroll, and then we're going to go over the practice squad list. Currently, we've got 15 players now under contract on the practice squad with one opening remaining. We'll see if that ends up going to John Radigan, who was the last person cut off the roster. Had to clear waivers first in order to do so, and we'll see if he's brought on. I think that time period has passed now, and he's still not on the roster, so we'll see. Maybe he's looking for another opportunity out there before he reverts back. But lots to talk about, Keith. Welcome in.
Yeah, lots to talk about here. We got a practice squad put together to talk about, a couple of additions to Seattle, at least one addition to Seattle that wasn't made that I think is questionable, and yeah, lots to talk about.
Yeah. You know, the interesting thing about the practice squad is that all players on the practice squad were cut from Seattle's roster. They didn't go out and around the league and poach a few different players, but they did do a couple of cuts right before cut down, and swap a couple players out, and we'll talk about those. I want to go over injuries really quick just to give some updates. Devin Bush returned to practice, which is great news. Cleared after being in concussion protocol after the final game. Also, rookie nose tackle, which impacts our conversation later today. Cameron Young. With a calf injury, got back to practice day before yesterday and had his second practice yesterday. So that was per Brady Henderson, ESPN. Devin Witherspoon, still not out there. Darrell Taylor not out there with a shoulder. Derek Hall with a shoulder. They didn't have their helmets on, not practicing. Witherspoon hasn't practiced since August 7th. So that might be a bit concerning, but maybe they're just slow walking him back into being ready. When a player's not practicing at this point, a week and change away from the opening day kickoff, you do question whether he's going to be ready for that first game. We'll see how that goes. Pete Carroll specifically mentioned Mike Morris as a guy that they're still waiting to see if they can get him back from a shoulder injury. So they haven't made that determination yet. And we'll find out if that means that he goes on IR. It doesn't necessarily mean he's out for the season, but he would be out for a minimum of 4 games if they did that. Just haven't heard anything yet. And the last thing was that, we cut Sutherland, the safety, from the roster. Originally went to IR. He came off of IR and reached an injury settlement with the Seahawks. Apparently, it is a 6-week injury settlement. And that means he would be available to re-sign with Seattle in week 9. You kind of went over that in the last show.
Yep.
That's how those rules would work.
It also gives him an opportunity to sign with another team once he's healthy, rather than having his season end. I think it's a good fit. Like, basically, it's the active roster salary. And so if they had not given him the injury designation and then put him on the practice squad, 5 weeks of the roster on the 53 and 17 on the practice squad are about the same pay. And that's probably where they came to. But now he's able to return to Seattle in week 9.
We'll see if that happens. That doesn't happen a lot because, anybody can come along at that point and give him an opportunity. We'll see.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get down to the other moves. The big move, I think, was Seattle claiming defensive back, cornerback, Caillou Blue Kelly off of waivers from the Ravens. And 4-year starter at Stanford. I think we both liked him in the draft, but he was
Yeah,
kind
we
of
did.
a afterthought a little bit. He tested slightly poorly, so it caused him to drop in the draft. Originally talked about as being maybe a 3rd-round prospect, ended up running a 4.52, I believe, in his 40, which dropped him down just a little bit. Ended up going in the 5th round. They did cut him, however. I think they were intending to get him onto their practice squad. I know that his coach over there, Harbaugh, was not happy that Seattle came in, swooped in, and picked him up. But it's an interesting add to the roster. I've seen 2 different comps for him of the same player from 2 different sources in comparison to Julian Love as a player.
Well,
So maybe that's what Seattle was thinking, is to have somebody on the roster to develop over time, because he was picked up off waivers at this time period. He's on the 53-man roster, not on the practice squad. Just want to make sure that that's clear. Now they can make that move later on down the road if they need to.
they have to waive him, which would leave him open
Yes,
to
correct.
the Ravens claiming him and getting him back.
Yes.
So I don't know if they'll do that unless something happens and they're okay with losing him.
This indicates to me that they really liked him in the draft, because, and they felt okay with his film in preseason. Otherwise they wouldn't have made this move. And they did that with another player as well. We can talk about that. But anything on Kelly that is of interest to you?
Well, I mean, just the way he plays. He's long. He's somewhat physical. The lack of recovery speed if he makes a mistake is a thing, but the way Seattle plays a lot of zone, I think it'll be okay. I mean, he's not any slower
he's kind
than
of a press guy. And he can play all over. He's kind of diverse, which is great. Seattle likes that with their defensive backs, but he's more of kind of a get in your face, use his hands and body.
Yeah, so he needs to
disrupt your timing.
He needs to do what everyone else does during the summer and early in training camp, and that's learn the kick step technique that Seattle asks of their cornerbacks when they're playing in press. It's different and something that takes a bit to learn, and some people master it and do really well, and some people never do. And Trey Flowers is an example of someone who never did, and then moved on to a team that didn't ask him to do that, and has done better since leaving Seattle. So, we'll see with that. But the Seahawks liked him in the draft process. Just it didn't line up, especially after they took Witherspoon with the 5th overall pick, and now they get him anyway. So now they've got 2 young corners to develop behind all their other young defensive backs.
It's a very young room. It really is.
I think Artie Burns getting cut was interesting. I mean, we knew that he, just because of the quality in the room and the fact that he's older and all of that he was kind of in a tenuous spot, but he played really well.
He did play really well, and he reverted to the practice squad right away. He wasn't a player that needed to clear waivers. He's a seasoned vet.
He's a vet.
And so he came right over, though, and signed into that practice squad within hours. And so, maybe there's, some agreements, some arrangements going on there. Obviously, he chose to stick with the team rather than explore his other options. Now, he can go off of that practice squad anytime if he reaches the deal. But he likes it here. So I will say this about Blue Kelly. Agility was great. Short area quickness and speed. He ran had a 1.51 10-yard split, even though he ran a 4.52 40, which means right out of the gate he's quick, but just not that recovery speed. And then the agility test on the 3-cone and so forth and vertical showed some explosiveness there. So maybe they plan on developing him as more of a nickel. I don't know. He profiles as kind of an outside guy. That's where he's played. But the Ravens had him playing all over the place in preseason. Maybe that's why he struggled a little bit. Just wasn't quite ready. That's why they cut him. But their mistake is our benefit. So the other guy is kind of interesting. Seahawks claimed linebacker Drake Thomas off the waivers from the Raiders after the 53-man cut downs. And then in a subsequent cut John Radigan off the roster. Now, we both kind of predicted both these moves in a way. We had originally tossed back and forth in our prediction show, the roster prediction show, about Artie Burns. He was kind of the bubble player that we were thinking about moving back and forth. In my initial roster cut downs, I had him off the roster and onto the practice squad. And then at the last minute, I added him back in. John Radigan, same. He's just kind of one of those players that's real peripheral. Mm-hmm. And Drake Thomas is a guy that they apparently valued quite substantially. Had a great preseason. Was ranked as the number one pass defense linebacker in Pro Football Focus, and number 2 in run defense in the preseason of all linebackers to play. And then in college, he was just very, very prolific. 238-pound guy that's only 6 foot or 6'1". Had 100 tackles, 19 tackles for loss, almost double-digit sacks his last season at North Carolina State. So he's a guy that comes in and really takes over for John Radigan as far as a developmental guy, off-the-ball linebacker. Has some diversity to him as far as being able to play in different spots, but probably going to have to earn his keep on special teams for sure.
Yeah. His results in the preseason were good, and I think that's kind of what earned him the spot. But he's an undersized middle linebacker. Doesn't have the length to keep blockers off his body, and isn't particularly athletic. He's got some short area quicks, which I think will help him, but doesn't have the overall speed that you see from a lot of Seahawk linebackers, guys like Devin Bush and Jordan Brooks and Bobby Wagner. So I like him, and I like his production. I think he's got the mental makeup of a Seahawk, which I think is part of why he's here. He was one of the 30 for personal visits that they had pre-camp that they're allowed to have. So they clearly liked him. They didn't like him enough to draft him. He went undrafted.
Neither did anybody else, right?
And so I think that's an interesting part. It's like with Kyu Blue Kelly, he's a guy that I think the Seahawks wanted to draft, but he just went to Baltimore before Seattle could make that move. With Drake Thomas, they didn't draft him. And so maybe they wanted to sign him after the draft, and the Raiders, right, just offered him a larger signing bonus or just got to him faster. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean,
some guys are just good football players, Keith, and that looks like what Drake Thomas is. You mentioned the measurables and the straight line speed, all that kind of stuff. But sometimes, he was just so productive. And then he gets into the preseason, he's very productive. And then you listen to not only the fans, but the coaching staff from the Raiders on the loss of not being able to retain Drake Thomas to their practice squad was they were not happy, which is good news for the Seahawks. I don't know exactly where he fits. Obviously, when you claim somebody off of another person's team and they try to integrate them into your own roster, it takes a little bit of time to kind of figure that out, out what they can do, where they can fit in. So we'll see how that goes. Okay, so let's talk about our own 16-man practice squad.
So Seahawks actually have 15 on the 16-man practice squad, and it's highly predictable, and it's all 15 players are players that Seattle had in camp. They didn't go out and get a bunch of guys from around the league. They liked what they had. And a lot of these are guys that you and I had on the practice squad when we did our predictions. So overall, it's it's interesting. The first player that came to mind when I was looking at this was Winston Aesop Jr. or Aesop Winston Jr. There we go.
There you go. Yeah.
And he was a guy that I had making the roster. And so when he didn't, because they, it was just one of those things with the way the spots lined up. You knew he was going to land on the practice squad unless he got claimed. Nobody claimed him. There he is.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, he had 6 catches, 103 yards, 17.2 yards per catch in preseason, scored a touchdown. Obviously, his special teams, standout special teams player. They hadn't made a corresponding move with Derek Young as far as getting him over to IR. Maybe Derek Young is not going to have surgery and is closer to playing than not. This indicates to me, too, that they're very, much interested in having Derek Young be part of the offense this year.
Yeah.
And we'll just see how that goes. But I would imagine if Derek Young goes to IR, Aesop Winston Jr. comes up on the roster. Levi Bell. Everyone was interested about Levi Bell. Kind of some disappointment out there as he played really well, had 10 quarterback pressures in the preseason, and just seemed like a natural player. He did get to the practice squad.
I'm surprised he didn't get claimed. I know there's 1,000 players out there, and
that's part of it.
There weren't many waiver claims issued league wide, but
there was not. There was like 20 something. And Arizona had 6 of them, I think.
Yeah, and Seattle had 2. Right. It's just with Bell was so productive. He looked so natural and so good. Like, he's a guy that it would be really easy to see, hey, we could get production out of a guy like that. And so that's why I thought he would get claimed. This isn't it's a project, but we really like his athleticism. Like, no, this is a guy that you could see coming in and making an impact. And so I was a little surprised, but he also, the things that made him available to Seattle, are why he might not have gotten claimed. He's still very undersized. So teams may have looked at that and said, yeah, he was productive, but, right. And as soon as the but comes out, they're not going to put the claim in for him. So
to everyone's happiness, Seattle put another practice squad player on the roster from the linebacker group in Patrick O'Connell. Had a great preseason, ex-Montana State guy, 18 tackles during the preseason. So he's back on to the practice squad. That's good news. He's a guy that they want to develop. We'll see how that goes between Drake Thomas and Patrick O'Connell over time. Those are 2 guys playing the same position, essentially.
I was kind of surprised that they kept Radigan and cut O'Connell instead of doing the other way around, because O'Connell looked like the better player. He just did. And it was a more sure tackler, more explosive, that kind of stuff. So I was a little surprised, but now Radigan's gone and off the roster. O'Connell is on the practice squad. Radigan's also waiting his 24-hour time period before he can be added to a practice squad. So he may be back as well.
Yes. And you're right. We just don't know the exact timing of when that was turned into the league office and so forth. That Radigan could definitely be back by the time that we're recording this, for sure. Safety Ty Okada made it to the practice squad. I had him, I think, as part of a practice squad guy, but he's not really kind of somebody that has stood out for me during preseason. But they go through all the practices. They get to know these players. He's a guy that they definitely wanted to bring back, especially since Joey Blount was put on IR. His season is over.
Yep. That is, that's what it comes down to is they like having extra defensive backs in there. They want that They want guys to develop, and if there's an emergency, they want guys that can come up and make a major impact on special teams. And without Joey Blunt out there being that person for them, they're like, okay, well, Okada was the next guy, so he makes it. He's in. Good for him. It showed there were a bunch of guys that could have come in that spot. They picked him, so clearly he did a lot of things right. In practice.
And Sutherland being injured too, that made an impact on that. Seattle did put a defensive tackle on their practice squad. One of the very out there, Matthew Gotel. I like that move. There is a chance, based on, and we'll go over this list soon, all the defensive tackles out there. There is a chance that he could get picked off at some point because of supply and demand, and the supply out there is bleak. But hopefully he can get a chance to come back up onto the roster. Now, if they make a move with Tariq Young rather than bringing Aesop Winston back, there is a chance they could bring somebody like Gotel back onto the roster, or a number of other different moves as well. Tyler Mabry's back. I think his third
year on the practice squad.
On the practice squad for him. There's a chance for him to come up if there's injuries, or if they decide to have 4 tight ends 1 week. He's a guy. Colton Ehlers, the quarterback, made the practice squad. Good for him. Completed 16 of 27 passes for 159 yards. Had a bunch of rushing yards as well. It's kind of a developmental guy to have on the roster. Doesn't mean he's going to stick there the entire year, but that's where he starts. Good for him. He's earned that. Matt Landers made it to the practice squad, Keith. Wide receiver Matt Landers.
He's a guy that was a standout in the summer, faded once the pads went on, but has the height, weight, speed, things that you can't teach, and just needs development as a route runner. And it's great. I'm happy that he's back, because I think that he's a guy that has long-term potential, and just needs a little bit of polish, and being able to practice every day at the pro level will help.
Yeah. The other wide receiver that they brought in was Cade Johnson. Apparently his injury wasn't sufficient to get him onto IR or anything like that. So he was put onto the practice squad. I think this is his 3rd season there as well. A couple cornerbacks. We had already mentioned Artie Burns going to the practice squad, and then Lance Boykin is also there. Coastal Carolina project this last draft process, and it was a camp invite. Made it to the practice squad. Good for him. Running back Derodrick Thompson is there, which we kind of predicted. Also, Bryant Koback came back,
which after was one of the first guys that were announced as far as cuts. You kind of he was a guy that you were like,
before
okay,
the 53 cut down day, but a week ago.
You kind of were like, okay, well, maybe the team's just moved on, but he had a really nice game against Minnesota in the preseason and looked kind of natural, running in the scheme and doing some of those things. So I'm glad to see him back. If nothing else, just to see more of him, find out if that really was a fluke, or whether it was who he was. And Derodrick Thompson, after that game, he was the guy that really supplanted Koback as the go-to running back once the veterans had been taken off the field, and looked fine, looked good doing it. So with some of the injuries at running back, I could have seen Thompson make the roster. They chose to keep the 4 guys that they have, even with the injuries. I'm just glad to see Thompson back on the practice squad, because I have a feeling we're going to see him in uniform this year.
I hope not. But yeah, no doubt. And then a couple offensive linemen made the practice squad, Joey Hunt and Greg Island. Those are the two guys that I had on my practice squad when we did the prediction stuff. And those guys are the guys that they brought back. Overall, Keith, we did, I thought, really well from our predictions to our final roster, and just a couple peripheral moves that were different than ours. Of course, you can't predict exactly who they're going to go out and get off other teams as well, but overall, I thought very good.
Yeah, I mean, they still need some defensive linemen. And Sykes didn't make the
True.
the practice squad, which I found interesting.
Yeah, and maybe he's the holdout. He hasn't signed to anybody's practice squad, and maybe they're trying to get him back on. I don't know.
Yeah. So yeah, that's that. He's the one guy that I'm kind of curious about, but we still know they need defensive linemen, whether it be Sykes out of the practice squad or going and getting a guy that can be on the 53 and make an impact right now. They need a defensive lineman or two.
Well, we can talk about that. Now, Brian Monet, I'll mention this, did go on to IR. He's done. Vi Jones as well, by the way, in addition to Joey Blount. Okay, so defensive tackles out there. It's pretty bleak, Keith. A couple of names that everyone would probably recognize is Chris Wormley, 6'5", 300 pound, 29 years old, previously played with Pittsburgh. He's sitting out there. Matt Ioannidis, 6'3", 305, is sitting out there, and Akeem Hicks, 6'5", 324 pound nose tackle, is out there, 33 years old. These guys are sitting out there, haven't been signed by any team. They could be in the process of retiring. There's no indication yet that they have officially retired, and that's why they're still on the list, especially Akeem Hicks, 33 years old. Not sure if he's coming back or not. There's a few practice squad defensive tackles available around the league, but the pickings are slim. I like Jared Clark in the draft process. He's on the Chargers practice squad at 335 pounds. He'd be a developmental guy, but if you go pick him off, he's got to be on the active roster. I don't see Seattle making that move unless there's some sort of injury situation with our current players. And Christian Covington, Tristan Hill, Danny Shelton's out there on a practice squad right now as well. But the thing that freaks me out about Danny Shelton, after being a high draft pick many years ago now, is that he's played on, like, I don't know, 7 teams now at this point. One for every new year that he's in the league. And that, to me, is kind of, I don't know, there's something there.
He had a really good year as an interior pass rush for a nose tackle, and New England let him go anyway. And that is odd. And then he hasn't really done much as he's bounced around. And so it just makes me wonder, like, is there something, like he doesn't have the explosiveness he used to because of an injury? Is there a locker room issue? Is there an issue where he freelances too much and doesn't do his job? That's how he was able to get all the sacks, but it causes other problems because he's not in the right gap and that kind of stuff. Honestly, I don't know, but the fact that he had a big year as a pass rusher and still can't land a long-term gig is interesting. We'll go with that
he's
word.
not really known for being a pass rusher at this point in his career. He's more of a kind of a run guy. Playing on first and second down would be his gig.
Yeah.
Because there's better options out there for pass rushing interior guys. But, Seattle does have a few options, is what I'm trying to say. There's another guy out there in Deshaun Hand that's available. Tommy Togaya, Matthew Butler, Marquise Copeland, Rashad Nichols, Kyle Pico. All these guys are defensive tackles around the league that are on people's practice squad. So the level of player, you have to keep that in mind. These are probably mostly younger guys, a couple of vets. but that's what you're going to get, and they have to come onto your
Onto your
53-man
53.
roster if you're going to make those moves. Now, if Seattle was going to really address this issue,
It's
this
going
would
to be
have
through
been
trade.
this would have been addressed. That. Now, what I was going to say is this would have been addressed in the offseason if they thought it was a major problem. Never did. Now it's picking up one of these guys or it's a trade. We've talked about that as being an opportunity to take advantage of. I would have thought that it would have happened by now, but some of these things kind of get resolved this week. So it wouldn't surprise me still if there's something in the works. They just haven't completely done it yet. But maybe they're happy.
I mean, I think they're happy with the quality. It's the depth that's the problem. There's 6 guys on the roster for the defensive line, the entire defensive line. And even on the practice squad, there's Gotel and nothing else. Like, they've only got 7 players potentially available for practice on the defensive line, which means these guys are running. They're doing every rep. There's no backups. There's no third string guys to run the scout team. It's just these guys. So I'm surprised. I really am. I think that eventually there are moves made. They may not move the needle for us, but I think there's got to be moves made just to kind of handle the depth issue. And maybe that last spot is for Sykes instead of Radigan. Who knows? Maybe a trade is in the works. Maybe they're just waiting for the dust to settle a little bit so they can take the time to evaluate some of these options at defensive tackle, because none of them are ones that, the Seahawks had at the top of their list. Those guys made teams. And so now it's like, okay, a second wave. Let's do our evaluations. Let's make sure we know that we're getting the guy we want. And then, they'll make a move to sign them off another team's practice squad here in the next few days. I don't know, but I expect them to.
The other thing that we're going to look at here is the injuries on our own team. Darrell Taylor's got a shoulder. Derek Hall has a shoulder. Did not practice this week. It's been a little while. They're waiting on Mike Morris. I know that they like Mike Morris. Mike Morris is the guy that they planned on moving inside to be a defensive end 4-3 or 3-4 defensive end for them, playing at the 3 tech. And we'll see how that impacts it at this
Looked
point.
Good there pre-injury.
Yeah,
but he's been hurt.
So there's opportunities if those guys do go on short-term IR. There are opportunities to bring somebody else in, and so we'll see how that goes. And maybe it is Gotel. Maybe that's the guy, and they're just kind of waiting now for one of these other players to go on IR, including Derek Young is sitting out there too. So.
That's one thing that they haven't done yet is they put a bunch of injured guys onto their 53. With you and I both thought there were possibilities there of shifting a guy to short-term IR, which only has them out for 4 weeks, and using that roster spot to bring a guy in and add some depth. And they did not do that move yet, at least, for any of those guys. So
the interesting thing that Pete kind of hinted at yesterday was that the fact that they do not have to declare injured players now between now and the 2 days prior to the game. So for the Friday, which would be the 8th of September, is when they need to release their first injury report. And so I would imagine that they're going to take some time now to really kind of evaluate these guys and make sure they make the right decisions on whether they're going to be ready in the next week or two or whether they need a little bit more time.
Well, and if the plan is to shift him to IR and bring a player on the practice squad up into that spot, the fact that they're on the practice squad means they're already out there practicing. They're already preparing as if they're going to play in the game. The team's just not telling anyone that's going to happen until it happens.
And the Seahawks can bring up 2 players for the first game off the practice squad
I
that
would
aren't
be
on the 53.
very surprised if Gotel is not in uniform, ready to play. Whether
too.
from
Unless
one of the
another
two
move.
methods to get him out there.
Yeah, unless there's another move. Yeah. Agreed. Interesting. So what do you think overall? We've got this roster. It's all done, essentially, other than some, pluses and minuses, that we've just talked about. What do you think? How's your prediction show going to go? Is basically what I'm asking. As far as regular season wins and losses,
I think we should do the prediction show in the afternoon and not the morning. Because I think having an adult beverage nearby is going to be more fun. But as far as beyond that, the Seahawks have a tough schedule, and I really worry about that defensive line depth late in the season. There's a stretch in there with 4 tough games in a row, including both games against the 49ers. And without the depth on the defensive line, that could sink the season if they stumble there. And so I'm not going to give anything away about my predictions, but I will say that there is intrigue. So,
I mean, other than Matthew Gotel at the defensive tackle spot, there's nobody on the practice squad at all.
Yeah, that's why I was surprised Sykes didn't get signed.
Yeah.
Who knows though?
I am too.
But that could have been, his agent might have said, let's wait a second because he really wants to play in, someplace closer to home. And so they wanted, 24 hours to see if anything like that showed up. And then
I would trade Sykes onto the practice squad and get Okeda or Lance Boykin off for a little bit. It's just it's not a matter of those players being bad. It's a matter of priorities on the team. And I view it that way. You do, others, but the team is making these decisions now. John Schneider has the benefit of being able to see the entire picture, understands his method and madness as far as these moves and how they work together and orchestrate. And so we only have a little bit of the information after it's done. So we're trying to read into it a little bit, but he's already got a master plan where he's, he already knows what he's going to do. So. All right.
Let's get out of here.
Yeah. Cool.
One of these days we need to decide if we're going to keep saying Twitter since it doesn't exist anymore. It's now X.
Yeah, that's
weird. And I don't really even want to acknowledge that too much. But X. Yeah, you can find Bill on X.
Let's go X this out. I mean, tweet this out. I don't know what I mean. All right. Yeah. So find Keith on X at Myers NFL. You can find me
I
at
just can't stop laughing when that comes up. I just
it sounds so dark. I don't know why. It's just kind of crazy.
You gotta say it. You can't just say X. You gotta say X.
Yeah, the bird, the tweet thing is kind of light and fun, and X is like
it's black.
Yeah, it is black. The logo is black.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, find the show on your favorite podcast platform and YouTube. Hit that subscribe button, share it, leave us a great comment. That would be wonderful. So until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NWSeahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.